IVM.
This episode of Mr. and Mrs Binge-Watch is powered by Storytel.in. Now, one of the books you guys should check out on Storytel is The Girl on the Train. Guys, I love psychological thrillers. Literally, half my bookshelf is made up of all these crime, murder, psychological thriller kind of books. And this book has been written by British author Paula Hawkins. The story is told from 3 first-person narratives. I mean, really, this is a book that you absolutely must read because it's given us not 1 but 2 adaptation movies. Now, if you want to read many such books, well, make sure you use the link storytel.com/IVM to get a 30-day free trial as opposed to just a 14-day free trial. I mean, guys, we're giving you 16 whole days extra. तो और क्या चाहिए? इतना पैसा में इतना ही मिलेगा. Go click on the damn link. storytel.com/IVM. You've tuned into a show called Mr. and Mrs Binge-Watch and you were expecting a spoiler-free episode. I mean, what were you expecting for us to just talk about the names of the characters and the synopsis and go home? No, bhai, discussion kar rahe to spoilers to honge hi. So there are many spoilers on this episode. Kripya dhyan dijiye.
Janice and I are suckers for true crime dramas. If you need any proof, you can go back and listen to our episode where we spoke about the documentaries Making a Murderer and The Jinx. True crime is a genre that Janice and I really enjoy. It's pretty much whenever a new show belonging to the genre hits the internet, chances are that we'll put some of the other shows on the back burner just so that we can finish it. One such show landed on Netflix recently. It's called Unbelievable and it is unbelievably good. This is Mr. and Mrs Binge-Watch. You're listening to Janice and Aniruddha. And Janice, what did you think about Unbelievable?
I thought it was unbelievably good.
I already called that covered.
Kya line hai? Unbelievably good.
Yeah, I know. My introductions are unbelievably good.
You know, the thing is that when we were watching the show, immediately within the first sort of half an hour, I think we discussed, or I don't know if we came to those conclusions separately, but I know that we both thought about how there's a good chance that a lot of people are going to not watch this show because they're going to be so worried about how it's going to make them feel.
No, it's definitely a show that should come with trigger warnings. It does.
Yeah, it does. Netflix puts very clear trigger warnings at the beginning of every episode for this show.
And actually, you know, this is a show that can trigger off anxiety and mental health issues and, you know, just make you feel uncomfortable irrespective of whether you're a woman or a man. More so if you're a woman, of course. But, I mean, just to give a little bit of context, what I really liked about Unbelievable is the fact that it's based on this reporting by T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong, which was essentially published for the Marshall Project. And it was something that won the Pulitzer, in fact. And it was about a series of rapes that took place in Washington and Colorado. But what was interesting is that they told the entire reportage was done from the victim's point of view. Essentially what happened was that a young girl who was just about turned 18 was raped in the year 2008. And she was raped by a man who essentially broke and entered her house in the middle of the night, dressed up in a mask, carrying sort of
a
backpack which had all kinds of things to tie her up, a blindfold and stuff like that. And so this rape was obviously, she communicated the same to the cops. I mean, essentially a lot of things happened that led her to retract her statement. Essentially, one of the main things that happened was that both the cops who recorded her statement were men who made her feel really uncomfortable after a point, sort of badgering her with the kind of questions that they do to rape victims even today. It led her to a point where she realized that rather than going through the trauma of having to report a crime and living with it every day, she'd rather retract her statement. And that kind of backfired for her because she had to then live with the stigma of being a person who misreported a rape crime. So everybody who supported her, everybody who sort of was sympathetic towards her sort of turned against her because they could not fathom
how someone could make up
such a serious accusation. Now, that's a story that you essentially see from a victim's point of view. That's not something that you see in a lot of procedurals, right? But here's where Unbelievable gets interesting, is that while they've dedicated the entire first episode to the victim, and on the show, the name of the character is Mary Adler, From the second episode onwards, it's essentially following Detective Karen Duvall, played by Merritt Weaver, and Detective Grace Rasmussen, played by Toni Collette. Two great actors and two female detectives, essentially, who are now investigating a series of rapes that take place in the state of Colorado. And of course, as an audience, you've already made that connect where you realize that the person who's doing those crimes in Colorado is the same one who probably was the one who raped Mary Adler back in the day. And you as an audience are waiting for them to make that connection so that, you could actually also see justice done to Mary Adler. So I think that's what makes the show very interesting, because on one hand, that most kind of shows that you watch, they're either procedurals where you are essentially obsessed with the detectives cracking who the criminal is, or you follow shows like, say, When They See Us, which is about a miscarriage of justice, and you follow the point of view of the victims and you hope that justice is done to them. Unbelievable essentially combines these two elements, where you follow the victim of a crime and you follow the investigators, and they're both, here's the beauty, right? It's both unfolding in two different timelines. So they never really meet, in the sense that Mary Adler's entire track is unfolding in 2008, whereas the two detectives' tracks are unfolding in 2011. And somehow they are connected by the same criminal. And I think that's just such a fascinating, I think the writers have done a great job of taking that approach.
The other thing that the writers get so spot on is that Susanna Grant, who's the main showrunner on this series,
right,
is also, she's more popularly known for having written Erin Brockovich,
yes,
another female character who we love. But what she does over here, and I think that's also why she's gotten so many props, not just from, of course, people who've loved the show, but also the original journalist who sort of broke the story and wrote the Pulitzer-winning prize, is that it's one thing to tell a story. Of course, it's a feat in itself to be able to bring two timelines together so seamlessly, because when you watch the show, you will realize that even though it's happening in two different timelines, when that meeting point happens, it is so fulfilling that as an audience, like, as someone watching it, you're like, yes, this finally happened. I was waiting for these two arcs to kind of, meet somewhere. But I think what she also does so effectively is creating the mood. The first episode of this show is genuinely, for a lot of viewers, it is going to be a very healthy, uncomfortable space for you to be put in.
Yeah, it's tough.
Because I feel like, we talk about rapes, we talk about sexual assault, and we don't really talk about necessarily how you expect that situation to be. Rape and, sexual assault across the world is spoken about as something like, oh my God, that person must be then now crying all the time, or sad all the time, or depressed all the time. And while all of that is true, because of course any kind of sexual assault leaves a lifelong emotional scar, especially for women, because we are at the end of the day the ones who are preyed upon far more than men. I remember there's this very popular line, I think in Weep itself, that if men were getting pregnant, you'd have abortions happening at ATMs. This was a very, right? This is a very popular, Julia, it's a very popular line spoken by her on the show. Anyway, coming back to the whole point of how rape victims are portrayed on screen, because even again, when we see them in movies and shows, they're constantly shown as women whose lives are now completely gone for a toss, so much so that they can't even function. This show, I feel like, breaks that to a large extent, because right after Mary Adler the rape happens, and what people around her can't seem to come to terms with is the fact
how
that
normal she is. Yeah.
She wants to go to the shopping mall to buy herself new sheets. And she's obsessed with getting the
She's
same.
actually also really enjoying setting up a new room, because so she stays in this little community building.
Like, it's a subsidized community.
Sort of a shelter for foster kids who have now moved on and grown adults and are trying to make their own lives. So it basically ensures a transition from their foster homes into the real world. And so she basically obviously can't, mentally make peace with staying in the same house or accommodation that she was sexually assaulted in. And there is this entire segment where she's now setting up the new room, and she's genuinely excited about it. And it's interesting because at the end of the day, she is an 18-year-old girl, and also you don't know what steps you take as a person to shut out trauma.
Correct.
And that's probably her way of doing it.
In the first episode, it's also for the viewers, it'll be a bit of a, but why is this girl so normal? Of course, through the course
Would
of
it be? I don't think the
No,
viewers would
let me
think that.
explain. Let me explain why. Because we're so used to portrayal of victims of sexual assault in a certain tone, in a certain light, that showing you how normal Mary Adler is after being raped and after having gone through. She's more tired and exhausted than sad and depressed.
Yeah.
She's more irritated and wanting to just get over with it as compared to, crying her eyeballs out and wondering, why did this happen to me? So I feel like Susanna Grant, that is it's so important for us to see this, because that's breaking another stereotype, right? At some level, about what you want and how this entire performance theatrics that we expect victims of any kind of trauma to be showing us.
Yeah, and also, I realized something, that when I watched the trailer of the show, when it came out, they kept the entire investigation part of it and the detectives completely on the down low. They did not, in fact, refer to it much. It was just about the fact that there is this girl who is trying to give her statement to cops, or, just going through the motions right after sexual assault has taken place. So whether it's that first responder coming in and taking your confession, your statement, then the lead detective coming in and then getting you to repeat the entire statement, then you being taken for a medical checkup, then at the checkup you have to sort of give your statement once again for the doctors to have a record of what they've been told to the cops. And they have taken us through all those moments to the point where when all this is over, the male cop literally now gets asked her to write the whole thing down as a written statement so that, it correlates to what she's spoken. And it's interesting because you never see this. You see glimpses of it in a show, because like I said, most times you don't follow the victim. You are following the investigator.
Yeah.
You're just, going through, or maybe there's like a journalist character who's following the story. So you always see it from an investigative point of view. You do see glimpses of this, but what the show does beautifully is that even though it has a really thrilling procedural in the offing second episode onwards, the first episode tonally is completely different.
Yeah.
It's purely from the point of view of this victim, and it takes us, the audience, through the same steps that a victim would go through in such a scenario. So it's almost like you've not even ventured into who the person might be or why he's doing it. You don't even care about that. All you care about is, will the victim, sort of survive the next day and the day after that, the week after that. You're just like, it's like heart in your mouth. You're just waiting to see what happens to her, and then the thriller kicks in, and then the show just becomes something else altogether.
Through the first episode, I actually realized that I was getting more upset than the victim herself. It's very strange. Like you're outraging.
But I think it's meant to have
you're
that.
outraging for the victim, because the victim, as you learn through the course of the show, that she's not a protected, sheltered child who's been brought up in a very happy home. She's in fact the product
She's had such a tough childhood.
She's the product of the American foster home system, right?
Yeah.
Where she's gone from foster to foster, been physically and sexually abused in the past, been treated so badly that she was fed dog food instead of normal food. And these are things you realize later in the show. But in the first episode, even as a viewer, you're wondering, is she going to have a breakdown moment? Is she going to have that one thing where she just breaks down and starts crying? And that never happens. And you realize that only through the course of the show, that why Mary Adler reacts the way she does, which is also beautiful in a way, because it shows us that every victim is unique and every victim's response to a situation is unique. So just because someone isn't crying or breaking down doesn't mean that, well, in this case, they pretend they're like, oh, is she faking it? Is she doing it for attention? And I remember, oh my God, when the foster mother suggests that narrative, I literally wanted to go through the screen and punch her.
Yeah, because it's really the foster parent who puts it in the minds of the detective.
Yeah, because the detective
she might be lying.
Because they can't come to terms with the fact that why does she want the same bedsheet for her new room, the same bedsheet on which she was raped? Why is she acting out and behaving strangely?
It's also got to do with the fact that they have had their own personal experiences with the girl in the past. So what they are playing up is the fact that the girl is capable of being troubled and hence making up stories. Now, here's what happens, right? When you have a preconceived notion about a human being, and when that human being comes to you with a story, do you let your preconceived notions about the person rule your judgment, or do you just take the person who's telling the story on face value? That's a very interesting strand I feel that they pull at. But like I said earlier, the trailer had very little mention of either the Merritt Weaver character or Toni Collette, and they are both legends and great actors. And I love the fact that they do not even introduce us to the so-called protagonists in the first episode. They only come in episode 2.
Yeah.
We'll be talking a lot about the procedural elements of the show on the other side of this break.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I have an announcement for all of you, at least, the couple of dozen of you who are listening to us on SoundCloud. Come the end of October, early November, we're going to be discontinuing that channel. We're not really going to be making our content available on SoundCloud anymore. So if you are listening on SoundCloud, you can have a number of options. I say the best option is downloading the IVM Podcast app. But if not, you can download another podcasting app and you'll be able to find our content over there. We have a couple of new shows launching this week. Let me tell you about those. The first is called Boundless. This is hosted by Natasha Malpani Oswal. She reads her poems on mental health, relationships, family, marriage, and many other topics, and narrates personal anecdotes around these poems. Tune in to new episodes every Monday and Wednesday starting from 7th October. Postcards from Nowhere is hosted by Utsav Momoria. It's a travel podcast where Utsav talks about his journeys to obscure and fascinating places around the world. He explores the culture, history, and people from these places in the form of stories and gives you tips and tricks on solo travel. Tune in to new episodes every Thursday starting from the 10th of October. Here's what else you got on the IVM Podcast Network this week. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by Tej Brar, founder and managing director of Third Culture Entertainment. He tells Cyrus the stories behind his tattoos, talks about the upcoming Neon East Festival, and living in different places around the world from Boston to DC to Delhi. The 150th episode of Simplified is finally here. You sent in your questions and topic suggestions. Now listen to Chuck, Naren, and Shrikit tackle them. On The Habit Coach, Ashton is joined by Shimi Nadraja and Jessica Gabrielli from Power and Posture. They talk about the importance of arm balancing and how handstands can improve posture and build up core strength. On Tech Careers in the News, Shilithya is joined by Jayant Swami and Namrata Maheshwari, Chief Data Architect and Senior Architect at Accenture, to talk in detail about data points. On Golgappa, Trupti is in conversation with actress Sayali Phatak. They talk about her experience in theatre, acting as well as dancing. On Paperback, Racheta and Satyajit talk to Nirbhay Kanoria, the co-founder of online literary magazine The Curious Reader. He lists his favorite non-fiction books and the trends of reading on digital platforms. On Kinetic Living, Coach Urmi shares a surprise workout on Tabata Tuesdays, and on Thriving Thursdays, she shares a story that made her realize just how fragile life is. On Football Shitball, Gaurav, Karthik and Siva round up the Premier League weekend and talk about the absolute demolition Bayern Munich inflicted upon Tottenham. On Pulyabazi, Pranay and Saurabh are joined by Pratik Sinha, editor and co-founder of Alt News. They discuss the anatomy of fake news and its prevalence in today's time. And with that, let's get you on with your shows.
All right, we're back and we're talking about Unbelievable, a show that's unbelievably good and has landed on Netflix just a few weeks ago. All right, so, the thing that we wanted to talk next is about the performances. But before we get into the performances, I also feel like the makers have paid so much attention just to the way they're introducing the various detectives on this in this show, right? So in the first episode, you see these two male detectives who after a point are almost badgering your main protagonist, Mary Adler, into sort of telling us that, hey, I may have lied about the rape. They're almost, you see the circumstances leading up to it. You see the way they're questioning her. You see their tone. They're not friendly. They don't, if I was a woman, I'd never open up to two men like that, right?
I thought about that, and I feel like, there was a very easy... So, of course, what you are essentially getting at is the fact that there is a basic difference between female and male investigators when it comes to cases of sexual assault.
No, I'm not making this a gender thing.
No, of course it is. It is a gender thing. It is entirely a gender thing, and it's especially on this show, they've shown it to be a gender thing because the male cops in the first episode who are investigating Mary Adler do not have the same sensitivity or if you see Merritt Weaver's character in episode 2, and essentially that's what they do, right? What they do is they take a 3-year jump from 2008 to 2011 and begin with the fact that now Merritt Weaver's character, who's the cop, has been called to a similar scenario, similar crime scene as the one that Mary Adler was in. So there's another woman, there was a masked intruder who essentially gagged her, sexually assaulted her for hours. And you see the difference in her approach to talking to the victim as opposed to that of the men, like you said.
Yeah.
And it's
So why the
clearly a
men-
man-woman thing. And in fact, even now, all the new laws, even in India after the Nirbhaya case, hence have been introduced to ensure that earlier, which was not something that was followed earlier, is that when a female victim walks into a police station or is called, or if cops are ever called home by a female victim, there has to be the presence of a female cop for legal purposes. And the reason that has been done, of course, is the fact that men can seem intimidating to women in such scenarios.
I don't know. See, I want to be honest and say that I don't know if this is a man-woman thing. Maybe, of course, for the purpose of this show, because they're also
that's what I
following a
meant.
true life story. There is a huge difference in the way the male cops and the female cops behave on this show. Though I also feel like in real life, sometimes women can be as insensitive as men.
And they have insensitive women on this show as
Correct,
well.
correct.
I think
Because the foster mothers
the
are
foster mothers are the one who put it in the heads of the male cops
Exactly.
that Mary Adler may be lying.
So this is not
So I
necessarily
just-
a gender thing.
I mean, I agree with you. So what you are saying is that there might be a great, fantastic male cop who might do a better job than a female cop.
Yeah,
I agree. But
yeah.
what this show is trying to do is, through its three female characters and through how they portray the men, they are making a comment. They are making a statement. What they are trying to say is that the way, at various points in the show, they also talk about, for example, the makeup of police forces
Yeah.
in America. The fact that there are such few women cops, detectives who are investigating as compared to... So there is that whole disparity that they speak of. And what you take out of this whole thing is that at the end of the day, for crimes that women have to face within any country, especially in America, because that's where the show is set, you need women to be really able to empathize with those victims. It does not, like you said, mean that they automatically become great cops, but you need there to be a sort of womanly presence or smartness, so to speak.
I think the difference here is that the male cops also in this show started out with the right intentions.
Yeah.
And they're very clear about portraying them that way.
Yeah.
But once the seed of doubt has been planted by the
Yes,
foster mothers,
yes.
that, hey, this, Mary seems like she could be making this stuff because she needs attention. That's when you see the switch happen.
Yes.
I feel like the difference maybe is that a female cop and one with a certain amount of empathy, like your two female leads on this show, would possibly have disregarded a comment like what the first one.
Especially our two leads would have not paid attention to it. And I like the fact that it would have been so easy, like it happens on a lot of shows to do with African Americans, where you show certain white cops to be extremely one-sided and biased, and then you have that one sort of functionary white character who's like the good guy, and there is always bias that is shown, like we saw in When They See Us, for example. But I like the fact that, so when the show began and the two male cops entered, I was like, oh, these two guys are going to be complete assholes. But it's testimony to the writing and the way they created the characters, that they don't come across as bad men.
Yeah.
They just come across as men who aren't as good investigators as the women we meet later on.
And they aren't equipped.
It's more about ability. Then it's about it being, the fact that they are assholes or the fact that they don't believe the victim.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and I like the fact that they've also shown that one of the cops lives with the guilt of, having got it wrong. I think that was the most powerful scene for me, personally.
No, we'll come to that. Also, the other thing is that the introductory scenes, like you were talking about, Karen Duvall's scene is very similar to the male detective's introductory
Correct.
scene as well. And I feel like they do that on purpose because it is to drive home the entire, look at what happens when a female cop whose conditioning is different, who's better equipped to handle this kind of a situation. Look at the difference, because even when she's talking to the rape victim and taking her first statement, she is constantly about, are you comfortable? Are you okay?
She's constantly comforting her, yeah.
Can I ask you this question? Are you okay to talk with me? And
she also says something really important where she says that you don't need to explain anything to me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not here to judge you.
Because also one of the things that the show touches upon very subtly is that most victims also feel like they have a role to play in all of this. They feel like they would have done something that would have led the rapist to have raped them, that put them in that situation. So this is true. I mean, and I feel like, okay, and more women will understand on this, that whenever something happens with us, we're also more apologetic about it, right? When a sexual assault happens with us, we're also saying sorry and, oh, did I do this? We're questioning ourselves so much more. And that scene brings it out beautifully, because like you said, she immediately tells her like, hey, you don't have to explain your choices or what you want to do or why, and stop. And she keeps telling her to stop apologizing as well. There's nothing to apologize for, because she's talking about, oh, I didn't notice this, but I noticed this. And, she's constantly apologizing in that scene.
Yeah, there is also a very marked difference in the fact that while the men in the first episode with Mary Adler wanted to give more and more and more details.
And exact details.
Because I mean, for them also, I mean, look, they are also approaching the case in a very cold sort of, as an investigator. It's almost like their approach to investigating a sexual assault crime is what it would be to, say, investigating a murder or an arson or a robbery. It's almost like you're going in and you're doing what a cop must do,
but
without taking into account the fact, no, not just doubting, without taking into account the fact. I think that's what they're trying to drive home, is the fact that with sexual assault cases, you don't just need smart detective skills, which these two women have in plenty. You also need a certain sense of empathy and sensitivity towards. So the difference is that Merritt Weaver's character, Karen Duvall, in fact does the opposite. She tells the victim to not hamper herself with trying to remember everything at one go. She says, whatever you remember, it's fine. Because like you said, every time she forgets an anecdote, she apologizes, and Karen Duvall tells her not to, because she says that, it's fine. It's going to take your time. And really, I mean, look, Merritt Weaver, if tomorrow a crime takes place in my house, I want the cop who comes in to be Merritt Weaver. Because Merritt Weaver, and not just as a cop, I have noticed this in all the stuff that I've seen Merritt Weaver in. She has this uncanny way of speaking. It's almost like if Merritt Weaver was your therapist, you would open up to her you'd open the up, right?
It's like when she's talking, she's giving you a warm hug.
Yeah, you just got it right. It's like getting a warm hug, because she just has this way of talking which is soft and which is kind and which is just patient, and it's almost like some people might think she sounds bored, but I love Merritt Weaver, and I mean we are obviously going to get into the performances in the later segment, but both Merritt Weaver and Toni Collette are just such great actors.
I want to spend a quick minute on Toni Collette's introduction scene as well, and the reason we're emphasizing on this is because we hope that when you see the show, or when you now recap the show in your mind, that these points stand out, because even Toni Collette, so Toni Collette's nothing like Karen Duvall's character, right? Like, so Toni Collette, who plays Grace Rasmussen on the show, her character is actually shown to be a bit of a tough guy, right? But a tough guy who gets the job done. So her introductory scene, again, there's been a rape in her district, and she is now so hell-bent on catching the rapist that she's basically stalking outside, like, in darkened areas and in places where the rapist could be hiding or could be, sort of venturing out for his next prey, and she's actually just waiting. So she's that obsessed with the case that she, in her first introductory scene, she's picked up someone who's looking a little shady and hiding in the backgrounds, and she brings him in for questioning. So from the very outset, that the minute these two women get involved in a case, they're not taking it lightly anymore. It's not just part of the job for them. For them, it's almost like a mission that we have to find who the guy is.
It's more than just getting a job done. And you're right. I think that contrast, because you sat through one episode of seeing a girl being put through so much hell by law enforcement officers, and it's almost like your blood is boiling and you're angry. And I remember you and I spoke about how we felt the same when we were watching Delhi Crime, because a lot of people also, like you said with Unbelievable, would have felt triggered by that first episode of Delhi Crime where they actually show the crime, and then in the second episode the show kind of pivots towards the investigation, and then it turns into a thrilling procedural. Similarly, this show, what happens is that after having sat through that brilliant first episode where you're feeling uncomfortable, and you've got to probably even pause a couple of times, and you just need to after the episode ends, just breathe before you get into the second one. And then when you see the difference in how these two women cops are investigating or approaching their work, you feel comforted, right? It's almost like if you were the victim and you were made to go through the trauma of episode 1, you feel comforted because then you know that these two women they are such baller characters. And I love that because we have so many great male cop bonding shows, whether it's a True Detective, whether it's a Mind Hunter. And we actually have seen, you and I have watched a bunch of procedural shows about crimes being done against women and small children, where a lot of times the investigating officer is a woman.
Yeah.
So we've watched Top of the Lake, which is Elizabeth Moss. We watched The Fall, which has, Gillian Anderson. I mean, just kind of blanked out there. And we've seen Broadchurch, which has Olivia Colman playing one half of the investigative team. But I don't think we've ever watched a show which has two female detectives. Have we?
No, I'm trying hard to think of a show that has two female leads and it's not campy or whatever.
No,
I mean,
not two
because
female
I know
leads.
two female detectives. I mean,
detectives.
I know a lot of you guys are thinking, hey, there are a bunch of cop shows out there where there are two females kicking ass. But no, we're talking about in a procedural, like a procedural
thriller
genre where they're investigating cases of sexual assault. No, I think this would be the first.
Yeah, because we are so there is a typical trope in these male bonding shows, which is that the two men are driving around from one crime scene to the other and they have those long conversations. And this show has some of the best conversations. I think there is a standout scene where both Grace and Karen are sitting in a vehicle outside who they feel is a suspect, and having a conversation about their lives and how they started off as cops. And Karen talks about how she was part of one big bust that Grace had made years ago and how she was inspired by her. And there are it's amazing how these two women characters have been written. It's brilliant. I mean, they are great actors, both of them, but the characters have been written so well. And here's the thing. It comes back to the same conversation we had in all our Emmy episodes, which is that when female writers write female characters, they just write the most kick-ass female characters.
And they drop in such subtly done things, right? For example, Karen Duvall's character is also a mother of two very young children.
Yeah.
And so they're showing how she and her cop husband are balancing this life where he takes on the night shift and she takes on the day shift. And that, despite the fact that they're both working parents.
He takes on the day shift.
Yeah, he takes on... She
he's
works
a
during
patrol
the day
officer
and he
works
works through the night. But how, you constantly that narrative of, sometimes cops and, the guilty mother. It's done very nicely over here where they're showing that she's managed to balance a family life along with doing what looks like a intense job.
Yeah.
And the same thing, there's this one very small thing that just comes and goes. I don't know why it stayed in my head. There's a male officer who's doing a stakeout with Karen in one of the scenes, and he takes a call from a family member, and then as soon as he puts the call down, he says, I'm sorry, that was a family thing. And she looks at him and she says, never apologize for putting your family first.
Yeah.
And I'm saying these are things, again, when writers think about the characters and put themselves in their shoes, and maybe because they're also a more female dominant sort of writing team here, that's why they get these subtleties so spot on.
Yeah, but so now, let's quickly get into the fact that at the end of the day, Unbelievable is one of the best procedurals we've ever watched.
Yeah.
Because there is so much happening in the show. So like we discussed, there is the trauma of the sexual assault victim. There are those underlying themes of violence against women. And, it's quite remarkable that in spite of having been able to touch on all these themes, the writers also managed to give us such a nail-biting procedural. I mean, it's amazing. It's among the best that we've watched because every new lead, and I love this about procedurals in general. That's also why I love this show called Bosch on Amazon, which maybe Janice and I will soon talk about once the 5th season finally lands.
I am watching the show now.
So I've been a Bosch fan throughout, and I've been sort of insisting that Janice catch up with me. But I'm saying what I like about a show like Bosch is that all the great procedurals are not about doing too much all the time and making, जो हम लोग बोलते हैं ना plot twist था क्या, super plot twist था. It's not about that one plot twist. It's always about doing little things that build up and lead to a point where everything like the jigsaw puzzle falls into place.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, it's real police work. is not going to be about, wow, we made a discovery. It's a job at the end of the day, and you've got to go through the process of doing a lot of things that may not always lead to a clue, but is important, whether that's going over like footage of I love that the way they crack the case in Unbelievable. I mean, I know this is a spoiler heavy show, but still I wouldn't want to talk about it, because if there is any chance that you've not watched Unbelievable and you're listening to us, you really should go out there and see how they crack the case. I think that was really, really interesting.
Because, again, 2 women leads, 2 female detectives, they're both investigating a sexual assault. No, it's not just a show about empathy and, speaking in a certain tone. It's also about great police work. I mean, the kind of leads that these women come up with and that their teams come up with, and the amount of hard work. Because, again, this is all based on facts, guys. I mean, the makers of the show, it's been adapted from a Pulitzer-winning article, and they also did their own research on the kind of police work the detectives and their teams had to do to eventually nail the guy. And it's exhaustive, because whether it's looking at, days and days of CCTV footage, going through years of military and, police records, it's wonderfully done how they tie it all up together.
Yeah,
in fact,
sorry.
No. In fact, the thing is that, So the same male cops who they introduced in the first episode, when they finally bring him in the finale, sort of in the second last or last episode, to sort of tell him and break the news to him that, listen, this Mary Adler case that you guys had closed, and not just that, to add insult to injury, you all also sued her for false reportage or for falsely reporting a rape. That's actually turned out to be true, because she was his first victim. So he comes in on this one particular scene, and he has to sit through all of the investigative work that these 2 detectives and their teams have done. And at the end of it, he just goes out to them and says, this is freaking
he says
brilliant.
A great line.
No, there's two things over there. One is, of course, the fact that he says, what great work these women have sort of, like, you've got him. You've got everything you need from this guy. You've got everything that you could possibly need to put him away for a very long time. And the second line is?
The second line is essentially, it's a whole dialogue, basically, where he goes up to her, to Toni Collette's character, and says that, when you're cops, you talk about the bad cop in your jurisdiction. And then when you find out that there are bad cops, you wonder what the hell they are doing. And today I find out that I'm a bad cop. And I think that is a heartbreaking moment. Even though all the ups that happened against Mary Adler, it is credit to Susanna Grant and her team of writers that they've been able to humanize that male cop who up on the Mary Adler case and makes you feel bad even for him. Also, the guy who plays him does it brilliantly and helps us feel bad for him.
Yeah, you can tell ki matlab now my wheels in my head are really turning and I want to slap myself in the face many times over for not having believed her.
Yeah. One last point I want to make before we cut for a break is the fact that what has to be kept in mind is that the rapist, because he was a former Marine, as we find out, and had some knowledge of how the police system works, purposely committed all his rapes in different districts. Because there is this whole thing about how cops in America, and I'm sure it's true even in India and other parts of the world, don't always communicate with each other. So it's not like the hand knows what the leg is doing.
Yeah.
And I thought that part of the procedural was very interesting because when these two combine forces, it's not just about two women coming together. It's also their teams working together, and the fact that now they start exchanging information and how that leads. So there is another aspect of police work that this show gets.
Which actually starts off by a complete coincidence.
And that's why it's such a great story. We are talking about Unbelievable. On the other side, Janice and I will be talking about the great actors playing the three lead roles.
Hello everyone, welcome to Tech Careers in the New podcast series presented by Accenture. And I'm your host, Shiladitya Mukhopadhyay. In this podcast series, we'll get you the latest and greatest in the world of technology that's shaping the future of business as we know it. We're talking intelligent platforms, cloud, AI, blockchain, extended reality, and a whole lot more. Every fortnight on Wednesdays, we'll have for you a hot topic with expert speakers from Accenture talking about top trends in the space. how these are changing the world and creating growth across industries. And more importantly, we'll tell you how you can learn more, build your skills and expertise to grow and stay relevant in your career. Episodes out on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcast from.
We're still talking about Unbelievable, and let's take a moment to talk about those unbelievable performances. I mean, top of the list, of course, I know is Merritt Wever, who plays
For me,
Karen,
it is Merritt Wever,
plays
yeah.
Karen Duvall. I think she is the standout performer of the show because in a lot of ways, I kept thinking about this, that I felt like she's the anchor of the show. Do you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
she is the big mama of the show. She is the one who sort of, when you're thinking about Unbelievable and you're thinking who can rescue Mary Adler from this terrible, terrible situation, at the end of the day, more than Toni Collette's Grace Rasmussen, I kept thinking about Merritt Wever's Karen Duvall.
Yeah, and you're right, because Anchor, in the sense, she's also a connection between a much younger character played by Kathleen Dever and a slightly older character played by Toni Collette. So in that sense, they are able to give us three great female characters belonging to different age groups.
Yeah.
And you're right, I mean, Merritt Wever, Toni Collette by herself is a legend, right?
Yeah.
But to see scenes with her, between her and Merritt Wever, and there are these long monologues. There is this entire moment, a scene where Merritt Wever basically talks to Collette about the fact that there was this one time that she did not listen to her own instinct.
Yeah.
Because she heard about a physical assault that took place at a woman's home, and they apprehended the male, the husband, who beat up his wife. And she had this entire gut instinct at the end of the day that she should go and visit the wife. But her colleagues essentially told her that they should go out for drinks. And she didn't listen to her gut, and she went out for drinks. And that guy basically was released on bail, and he went back and he finished what he had started and beat the out of that woman. And that is such a great scene, and the way she tells that story to Collette. And of course, Collette is brilliant, and both their scenes are like dynamite. And like you said, they have such different personalities, and both those personalities. So actually things also lighten up a bit when the two of them are together.
Yeah.
Because they're playing off each other, they're pulling each other's legs. There's
Toni
a lot
Collette constantly has these moments because Karen Duvall's character is shown to be a church-going, very devout Christian in the show. So, Toni Collette's constantly taking the mickey out of her by, because again, Karen Duvall's character also quotes a lot from the Bible. So every time Toni Collette's like, where did that come from? What is that Jesus-loving girl? And then, it's like, okay, she's explaining to her, okay, this came from this part of the Bible. And Toni Collette's like, what? What is Matthew 16:2?
Yeah,
and he was looking at me and saying, again, what is that? Read the Bible, Guha. Now
Oh, because you know the Bible front to back, is it?
I've read it as a child.
But listen, I also read the Bible as a child, by the way. Don't be like all this like, I'm like, be all territorial
like
about
back
it.
on track.
But listen, Merritt Wever also is somebody I remember, even before we saw on Walking Dead, playing this young subordinate to Matthew Perry on one of my favorite shows of all time, which is Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
I've not watched it.
Janice, please stop doing these TV podcasts and spending your time watching Netflix and Amazon. I will download all the Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip shows.
That's your job in the
Please
house to download
watch it.
stuff for us.
It's the best f***ing Sorkin show ever. But anyway.
Better than West Wing.
Well, West Wing had consistency over 7 seasons, but that one season of Studio 60 is better than anything he's ever written before or after. But also, Caitlin Dever, I mean, young girl, she gives the most impactful because she had such a difficult role to play. And what I like about her is that she doesn't play her role like a victim.
Yeah.
It's also not written like she does not believe in self-victimization of any way. She's an extremely smart, intelligent girl who made some bad choices because of her immaturity and her age and, like you said, her past experiences. But, moments where she needs to show real prudence. And I think the dialogue writing is fantastic because every line that she says, her sentences, the words she uses, sort of give you an indication of how smart a girl she is.
Yeah.
And I thought that her character was beautifully written and beautifully performed. I think
I feel like her standout scene though was the one that she there are two actually that come to mind. One is a predictable one. The other one is the predictable one is of course when she finally towards the end of the show she comes back to the two male detectives who've done wrong by her and said, you know what, you guys have given me a compensation. You guys have now taken back the case. My entire thing has been expunged, but no one ever gave me an apology.
Yeah.
And I would think that if you did something so horribly wrong to a person, you would be very, very, very apologetic. Loved that scene because finally, it's also 3 years later. So you've seen her go from this 18-year-old who's unsure, confused, and just wanting to get done with every damn situation. And 3 years later, she seems slightly more evolved. And especially the minute she realizes that she was right all along, it sort of gives her this newfound confidence. She almost seems like a different person from the time that she realizes that the cops have finally learned their mistake. So that's one great scene with her. Then there's also the scene with her foster mother in the shopping mall where she's looking for sheets for her new bed and she wants the exact same print of sheets despite the fact that it was the same print on which she sort of got raped. The bed sheets were the same one on which she got raped initially. So... And the foster mother, for the life of her, can't understand why the girl wants these sheets. And that scene, that tantrum that she throws in those shopping mall aisles, very, very nice.
Yeah, also Kathleen Dever, I found out after watching the show, played a role on Short Term 12, a movie that I discovered Brie Larson through. In fact, Short Term 12 is a movie that, again, I don't think you've seen it, right?
No.
But I think audiences should watch it as well. It's a very old 2012, 2013 American independent film, which I saw at the Mami Film Festival, which incidentally has a bunch of these child actors who've gone on to do bigger things. So, of course, there's Brie Larson, who played the oldest character in a film. Short Term 12 essentially is this facility where they keep these kids and she plays a counselor. There was John Gallagher Jr. who went on to play the male lead after Jeff Daniels on Newsroom, the cute boy essentially. And there was Rami Malek at that time playing this awkward teenager.
Wow.
And there was the same actor who played Mary Adler, and she actually had the most important arc. Caitlin Dever had the most important arc after Brie Larson on Short Term 12. And it's funny, when I went back and read about it, I had a very vague recollection of her performance, but it just came back. It kind of explains to you why she delivered the performance she did, because clearly she seems like an actor who has a great body of work behind her.
So in short, you absolutely need to watch Unbelievable. Yes, the show comes with a few trigger warnings, so be ready to be uncomfortable. Be ready for this to maybe bring back some really uncomfortable memories. But this is also a show to me about hope. About
for sure.
What people with the right intentions can do, what people with the right intentions can achieve, and how your choices can really sort of frame your life and frame the life of others. I mean, when she gets that call at the end of when Mary Adler's character finally calls Karen Duvall and says, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh man, I was like, this is what I've been waiting for them to finally talk to each other.
Yeah. So Unbelievable is the show that I've enjoyed the most in recent times. I mean, I think it's one of the best shows that have come out of Netflix in recent times. I think it's going to be a really strong contender at the Emmys next year.
Yeah, this has got Emmys written
all over it. In the limited series
it.
category, writing, direction, all three actors. Merit Weaver for Best Actor for sure. But I'm saying even apart from all of that, apart from all the award talk and how great it is, I think also you and I are yet to watch Mindhunter, which we'll be doing very soon, the season 2 of which we haven't seen yet for some reason, even though it came out earlier. And I think that we are nicely primed to watch it after watching this show.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Unbelievable is just one of those shows that, I mean, it's a genre that has been overdone. You've seen those stories before. You've seen, you feel like just when you feel like there's nothing new left in the procedural genre, here comes Unbelievable, which is just such a fantastic show, and I absolutely loved it.
Unbelievable is absolutely unmissable. You absolutely need to watch it. And if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcasts app or on ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media handles. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me or to Aniruddha and share your thoughts on the show, well, I'm at Janice and Aniruddha Guha85 on Twitter and Instagram, and Aniruddha is at Aniguha on Twitter and Instagram. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week right here on Mr. and Mrs. Binge-Watch.
Do you have a night routine? Well, everyone has one. And the to-do list usually looks like this. Brush your teeth, set that alarm, get into your pajamas, and switch off those screens. But here's one more to add to that list. Tune into the Positively Unlimited podcast for a dose of positive action and tips on how to build powerful mindsets. Episodes out every Monday on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you tune into podcasts.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Racheta.
We are from the Open Library Project and we host a podcast called Paperback.
Paperback is a podcast where we engage with stalwarts and experts from various industries, suggesting non-fiction titles that contributed to their journey in a big way.
We've had guests like Anjali Raina, Dr. Marcus Rani, Dr. Swati Lodha, Ambi Parmeswaran, Apurva Damani, and many more on our show Paperback. Find new episodes every Wednesday on IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.